Yeah, our Wi-Fi, the other thing is our Wi-Fi is
really spotty.
Thankfully, it works on my laptop, but I had the same problem on my cell phone where it's like, I don't know what's happening sometimes.
I never know what I'm doing. Okay, so when this comes up in a minute, then I'm going to share it.
Perfect.
So it'll basically be right there. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it should pop up. If you follow Bold, you should get a notification that we're live.
Okay, I'll do it right now.
But if not, then you can just go to the... Okay, he's going live. Hey there. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bold TV. I'm Carrie Sheffield here with my guest host, Lauren Leader-Chivee. Lauren is the CEO of All In Together Campaign, a bipartisan women's civic leadership organization. Good morning, Lauren.
Good morning.
So glad to have you here.
Great to be here.
Thank you all for watching on Facebook, and don't forget to like our page, Bold TV. Also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. And if you love Bold TV, make sure to share the conversation. I think that's what you're doing right now. In fact,
I was trying. I'm too old to actually really know how this works, but I'm really trying.
Whatever. She's young.
So we do want to hear from you, so make sure.
We're going to check her ID later.
I'm over 40, so I don't know how to use these contraptions. Anyway, so we want to hear from you guys, so make sure to add your questions and comments during the show if you know how to do that, you know.
Facebook. I mean, you guys do a great job. We love it when you add your comments. And they actually help a lot with our interviews when we have our guests. So thank you so much. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. So let's just move to our headlines this week. First of all, I just want to say here at Bold, our hearts and our thoughts are with all those who have been affected by Hurricane Harvey and Category 4 Irma. It's just heartbreaking.
Well, we're especially thinking about the devastation in the Caribbean and, of course, the residents in Florida. Obviously, everyone should be seeking shelter if you haven't already. It's going to be a pretty intense couple hours, certainly in Florida. So we're thinking of everyone.
Yeah. And, you know, Lauren, I know your organization is all about bipartisanship, and we had a rare moment of this with President Trump and the Democrats joining together for a Hurricane Harvey relief package that was tied to the debt ceiling increase for a few months. So what did you think about this?
I was amazed. It was an astonishing thing to see. I think my favorite part is the picture through the window of the White House where you see Schumer sort of like in Trump's face, like patting him on the chest.
They're kind of like hugging each other.
It's really, it's kind of a surreal thing to see. Look, I mean, I think it was extraordinary and it was incredibly important. And I believe in giving credit where credit's due. All credit to the president for doing the right thing on this one. Really, I mean, anything short of a deal would have really severely impacted the victims of the hurricane. And so, good for them. I will say that I think you can still hear Breitbart very editor head explosion. I mean, the conservative press is really, particularly the more nationalist conservative press, is really flipping out over this. He's going to get this is going to be a tough one for the president. He pissed off his base in a big way.
Well, what I think is interesting, well, first of all, as Ted Cruz said in 2016, if you vote for Trump, you're going to get deals with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And lo and behold, Ted Cruz was right.
I mean, look, when you're putting the interests of I believe in putting the interests of the country first, and and that is the essence of what makes bipartisanship so important. Sure. If they had held the victims of Harvey hostage over the debt ceiling, I mean, really, like, what kind of country would we be? So I actually think this was totally the right thing to do, and I don't know what other choice he would have had.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I thought it was interesting. So I think sort of the villains in all of this was, to be honest, the Freedom Caucus. Sometimes these guys drive me crazy because they're just constantly attacking Paul Ryan, who I'm a big fan of, and trying to make his life difficult. And so President Trump was basically saying, hey, for the last 8 months, you guys have not been able to pass anything, so I'm going to go over and talk to these guys because for all your bluster, you're not getting anything done.
It's one of the few things that he's done that he said he was going to do. I mean, Trump said he was a deal maker, and he made a deal, and I think it was totally the right thing. I mean, the challenge is going to be, of course, and we're going to talk in a little while about DACA, heading into any immigration negotiations, if as you say, if the Freedom Caucus and other sort of the extremes on either side, frankly, start holding important sort of life-threatening, literally life and death legislation hostage for some really controversial things like the border wall or like the debt ceiling, we're gonna have a real problem. And the president has been getting nothing but bad press. His approval ratings are the lowest of any president in the last 30 years. This was the right thing for him to do. I'm not sure what other choice he would have had, and I commend him for making the right decision.
Yeah. Well, Lauren Enriquez, good morning. Lauren she's 29 years old, and she doesn't know how to work these contraptions either. But you know what? You made a comment here on Facebook,
much better.
Thank you, Lauren. She said, "Thank you for the kind thoughts. I'm a native Houstonian, and we are so grateful for the thoughts and prayers." Thank you,
and hopefully the help from the federal government and not just the thoughts and prayers. I mean, there's the cleanup effort is just gargantuan. It's almost unimaginable. And of course, now we're heading into potential devastation in Florida. So thanks to Congress and to the president for doing the right thing and doing it fast. This was incredibly important.
Well, and the timing of all of this also is overshadowed by North Korea and what's been happening there and all the missile tests and the growth and the expansion toward nuclear armament by the North Koreans. It's just terrifying, honestly. I just feel like I'm scared because as an American citizen, this has been a place where we've lost a lot of blood and a lot of treasure. Yeah. And the dynamics are so much different now in terms of if they get a nuclear weapon, the power dynamics are just totally, everything is, they can punch above their weight in ways that people couldn't do. A small rogue state in the past.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been watching North Korea for a long time, and the threat has been very real for a long time. I recognize that on the right, there's been this sense that, Obama just sort of didn't do anything or that there was this sort of policy of appeasement. But, really anybody on either side of the aisle who knows the complexities of the situation recognizes that there are no easy answers. I mean, we'll see whether the saber rattling that's been coming from the White House makes a difference. I think we're seeing it actually is escalating the situation. Nobody thinks there are easy or good options here, and nobody wants to go to war. I mean, to go to war in that peninsula is, catastrophic on a level that I think most of us cannot even begin to imagine. And of course, ironically, this president has been very focused on domestic issues and has said we would stay out of too many foreign entanglements, and then he's kind of thrusting us into all of this potential conflict in that region. Very smart, very gifted diplomats for years have been working on this, and and they don't come at this from any kind of partisanship. It's really like just trying to find a solution. It's not easy. The Chinese haven't been successful. There are dozens of countries that are still doing business with them that we could not possibly cut off even if we wanted to. It's a super complicated situation.
Sure. Well, and also I think China really is the big elephant in the room. And I know President Trump has been trying to put pressure and pressure and pressure on China because they're the ones who are bankrolling all of this. If you look at the economic activity flowing into North Korea, it's all coming from the Chinese in terms of buying their imports and exporting to North Korea. They're the gateway to the world for the North Koreans. And if we don't have the Chinese backing us up, then nothing's going to happen. So it's kind of this rock and hard place because we want to have good relationships with China, but at the same time, it's like, they have to do more. They have to be more responsible.
Right. But I think there's a real question about whether or not how much pressure, how much leverage they really do have. I mean, I think the economics are one piece of it, but you have to keep in mind that North Korea has had, global sanctions for years, is one of the most, there have been famines. I mean, the economic conditions are extraordinarily harsh, and that regime does not seem to have a problem tolerating that. And so, I do appreciate that the Chinese probably have the most leverage here, but I'm not sure. I think we probably overestimate how much power they really have to change what is basically, a madman whose entire identity and sort of reason for a living is his conflict with the West. So,
well, and Rondalee Deschamps, hey Rondalee, one of our loyal viewers, she makes the very astute point, as she always does. She said, with all our natural disasters, my fear is that Kim will see it as a good time to pull an attack. I think that makes sense. I mean, when you're distracted and it's sort of like the magician, waving the shiny object over here and then you're
right. Well, and I don't think it's just about I think that distraction is not just the natural disasters. I also think it's the political chaos in this country. I mean, a lot of very, well-regarded foreign policy experts, people like Richard Haas at the Council on Foreign Relations, have been saying for a long time that when American politics are in chaos, it actually weakens our strength and power abroad. And, I think for better or for worse, the kind of constant nuttiness of what's gone on with this administration since they've stepped in, the sort of scandal after scandal, it is a contributing factor. The world looks at this and says, Americans can't get their act together on anything. We have free range to do whatever we want, and it's a problem. So I totally agree with Rhonda Lee. I just think, it's bigger even than that.
Well, I think Trump definitely was elected to shake stuff up, and there could be there's always a potential upside. Like, that's the one thing I learned in working in finance. You have to take risk if you want a reward. So he's a risky person by all stretches. I think we can all agree on that, no matter your political stripe. And in this case, like, the upside would be that if he gets what he wants, then China is more responsible, because for the last 30 years, China has not stepped up. And maybe Trump could force China's hand, unlike, in a bipartisan way, like you said. George W. Bush couldn't do it. Bill Clinton couldn't do it. Barack Obama couldn't do it. Doesn't matter who was in the White House. No one has successfully been able to force China to stop bankrolling the North Koreans. So there's potential there. There's also potential to get the Japanese to step up. They're really nervous because the ballistic missile went right over Japan.
Right. Yeah, I mean, all that is true. I mean, I do think that, though, I think we're giving the president a little bit more credit than, frankly, is due. I don't think there's a lot of strategy going on here. I don't think any of us have seen any kind of coordinated or organized strategy. And the chaos in the White House is very real. I mean, they had 3 national security advisors in the first, 4 months of his presidency. I'm not sure how you really organize the kind of coordinated and complex issues that we're dealing with when you can't even get your own house in order, when your own people are leaking like mad, and you've got teams that are, going after each other and fighting. I mean, the lack of discipline in the White House, it's sort of fun fodder, if you will, on CNN, the sort of gossipy stuff about where's spicy this week. But it's much more serious than that. It's not just about whether or not they get along. It's about our ability to organize coordinated and complex foreign affairs issues, and our ability to interact with the world. And I worry about all of those things. It doesn't matter what party you're from. You want a successful president. I am not somebody who, wants to see him fail. I believe, for the sake of our national security and for the future of the country, I want him to succeed. But the kind of chaos that he sows on his team, it's just, this is not a real estate deal. Like, this is not about building a building. This is about the safety and security of the world. So I really hope that they can, now with John Kelly, that they can get a little more discipline and, start pulling it together, because this stuff, these issues, these global conflicts, the natural disasters, they do not wait for the administration to get their act together.
True. No, I do agree there has been instability, but I would say that Bill Clinton's administration early on had the same thing. So there is an ideological tussle that happens around, I think, a lot of administrations as well. And then with Trump, he has had General Mattis as a very steady hand, John Kelly. So he's got some great, really thoughtful
I worry about
people
that too,
around
because
them.
I will tell you, history has shown that when presidents let their entire foreign policy be run by generals, sometimes bad things can happen. And there's a great example of Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis. All of his generals were telling him to invade. Literally, there wasn't a single one of the military leaders around him who wasn't telling him to do that. And it was his sort of cool-headed, steady thinking and leadership that kept us out of having nuclear war. So I respect Mattis, and I respect the generals in our armed services, but there's a reason why the president is commander-in-chief and why the military leaders are not.
Well,
and
I think Nikki Haley has been stepping up, and keep an eye out for her
now
after Trump's out.
I know, but now
Nikki Haley 2024,
well,
that's
listen,
where my money is. I'm a huge fan of her.
Jobs. Like, the rumor around Washington is that Nikki's going to replace Tillerson, and then we're going to have, so Nikki's going to be out, and it's going to be Dina Powell at the UN. So I don't know. Stay tuned. But keep your eye on Nikki Haley for sure.
Yeah. Well, we can keep going on about this.
As we always do.
But we're going to move on. Lauren, who do we have on tap?
So we are honored and excited and so pleased to have Michael Frazier here. He's the Executive Vice President of External Affairs at the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. The museum has been visited by over 10 million people since it opened in 2014, including President Donald Trump and former President Barack Obama. So first, before we talk to Michael, let's watch a short video about
I was lucky. On September 11th, I was scheduled to work in Hazmat 1, but I had nobody to watch my daughter. And somebody that replaced me is not here anymore. He was lost on that day. 45 children lost a father in my firehouse alone, and there's a reason they should be here. So I felt like I need to make the best of my life and do something good with my life, because really I could have been lost on that day very easily. I had some passes when they originally opened up the museum, and I just did not feel I was ready to come. And it took me a while to want to come, and I think they really did a great job. They didn't overdo it. There's a lot of space and a lot of time to think as you're walking through it. I have to say it moved me, and I'm glad it's here. This is my city. This is my story.
Great tribute. I love it.
So welcome, Michael. It's unbelievable. I still can't get my head around the fact that it's the 16th anniversary of 9/11 next week. Can you tell us a little bit about the preparation for this year's annual commemoration?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the come on your show to talk a little bit about the 9/11 Memorial Museum and what we do. You know, I think for most people, we have visitors that come from all over the country, all 50 states, more than 190 nations. And I think a lot of people think that we just have the one day to look at, but there's a lot that we explore in our museum. We have something we talk about a lot called September 12th, meaning on that day, so many people rushed in and helped us. So, you know, it's more than just about that day. And so, yeah, the 60th anniversary is something that the world is starting to look at and stopping to observe what happened at the World Trade Center site and the two other attack sites. But, you know, here in New York, we almost think about it every day. So in preparation, as you can imagine, like in years past, the central focus of the commemoration is beautiful and simple, will always be the reading of the names. And that's 2,983 names. That's of the 3 attack sites. And most people don't realize we also recite the 6 names of the victims of the original bombing in 1993. You can think about the bells being tolled for each moment when the plane struck the buildings and when they fell. We expect to have dignitaries that will visit and come. Typically, last year we had 8,000 family members. It was really, really beautiful to see them there. And, you know, it's a privilege for me to work there, and I'm able to stand at the site, which is closed only for families. A new element that we did, because we understand that the community, especially in Lower Manhattan, people who are visiting our great city are coming. They wanted to be at the site too. So what we decided to do is open up the Memorial Plaza at 3 o'clock, keep it open until midnight so people can see the annual Tribute in Light.
I was going to ask, yes.
Yeah, tell us, what is the Tribute in Light?
So I actually we have an incredible team who are responsible for this art installation that began about 6 months after the attacks. Each year, 2 twin beams of light are shown over Lower Manhattan. There's tests that go on throughout before the actual event, but the idea and the purpose of it is to have the lights shine bright from dusk till dawn on 9/11. And if you have never seen it anywhere in the city, it's gorgeous. But what's even more powerful is seeing it from the 9/11 Memorial Plaza. It's actually not located there. It's south at a building on top of a building south of our site. But it's breathtaking to not only be at the World Trade Center site where, and then you get to see the lights. And, you know, for years when it was just ground zero, people would come down to the construction fencing and see, you know, all the construction going on. And everybody has those images of, you know, the tons of debris, the smoldering. It's beautiful there. And I think if people can just remember that even though we went through something that was horrendous, there has been something beautiful rebuilt there, and that's something that we should be proud of.
It really is so beautiful. And, you know, every time I'm down there, I mean, I was here in the city that day and lost some people. And, you know, every time I'm down there, it really does give me pause, because there is this part of the site which is sort of across the street, which has become the mall and all the buildings and the, you know, obviously the transportation center, which is amazing and beautiful. And so there's this kind of piece of like everyday life, New York back to normal. But then if you get anywhere near the pools and the trees, it's just like you just feel such a sense of power. And it's really, I think, one of the most successful memorials I've ever seen. It's so powerful and beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, it's, like I said, it's a privilege to be there. And what people should understand is that the reason that museum and the memorial exist is because the people who come and support it.
Yeah.
We're a nonprofit that we do not receive city, state, or federal funding.
Wow, really?
We do not.
Amazing.
So it's great that we love the 10 million visitors who come to the museum. They're keeping that place. They're sustaining this beautiful tribute. So, you know, I thank all of our supporters, our private contributors, but mainly you know, the people who travel from 190 nations, from 50 states to New Yorkers. Like, without them, you know, we wouldn't be able to sustain this beautiful monument.
Well, and it's one way that we make sure we never forget, which
Yeah,
is
absolutely.
really
Yeah,
so
no, I
powerful.
used to work on Wall Street, so my lunch break, I used to go our building. I used to work at Moody's Investor Service, and our
it's right
building
there.
literally looked down into the museum. I remember sometimes when it would be stormy, there's a waterfall inside the footprints of where the buildings were, and so when it's stormy, the waterfalls actually go upside down, and the water's gushing up, and it looks
I've
really
never seen
amazing. But yeah, it's just this really special feeling knowing what happened there. We have a comment here from Katy Perry, who is on our team and had a great haircut recently, but she wants to know, how can we focus on the positive and the good in people's hearts instead of the evil that happened on that day?
You know, that's a great question. That's something that we try to elevate at our place with, either through programs or even through our exhibitions. As I said before, this sense of 9/12, everyone coming, you know, the best of humanity came out that day, on the day, and also in the days following. What we try to do is look at the positive legacy of 9/11. You know, you have to remember too, it was one of the biggest in history evacuations, so a lot of people actually survived that day in the buildings. You also have to look at extraordinarily kindness from strangers. So we do try to look at the positive side of it. And when you come to the museum itself, the first thing people think is, well, I'm going to see buildings on fire. I'm going to see all the destruction.
Right.
Now, we don't whitewash the history. That's very important so people don't forget.
Yeah.
However, there's other stories there that people also need to be exposed to. In the site itself, we're built in the original foundation of the towers. So our exhibitions are inside the footprints of the North and South Tower. You know, so it's a beautiful
So
thing
powerful.
to see.
Well, wherever you are on Monday, take a moment to think about that day and to express gratitude to the first responders and those who made such a difference. So,
And to you
Michael,
too,
and to
Michael.
Michael
Thank
for
you.
your amazing service. Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for joining us. We're so
We
glad you could
appreciate
be.
it. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for having me.
So we're going to move on now to our regular Bookster segment. As usual, we love having the co-founder of Bookster with us, Sarah Hill. And as our loyal viewers know, Bookster is an online community for people who love books. This week we have Rob Smith with us, and he's been a familiar face here at Bold. He's filled in and done some appearances here on Bold, and he's back. He's the author of Confessions of a Don't Ask, Don't Tell Soldier, How a Black Gay Man Survived the Infantry Coming Out in the War in Iraq. So Rob Smith is an activist for LGBT rights as well as a veteran. He openly fought against the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law that barred lesbian, gay, and bisexual soldiers from openly serving here in the country. Welcome to you both.
Thank you so much. Always good to see you, Carrie.
Yes,
Welcome.
thank you. So tell us about your book. I mean, I know you, Rob, but I want everyone else to know about you and your book.
Okay, so the quickest way I can put this is the book is Moonlight meets American Sniper, right? So that's how I'm selling it, right? Sounds good, right?
Yeah,
sold, right? So it's Moonlight meets American Sniper. It's basically the memoir of the time that I spent as a very young man, struggling with my sexuality, being closeted in the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era military. Coming out, kind of finding myself in a lot of different ways, and then serving in Iraq for about a year right after the invasion.
So, I mean, I don't even know where to begin because there's so much here that I want to talk to you about. So first of all, why did you decide to join the military? I mean, you must have known come to terms with your identity before you joined?
Well, I was very young. So I was 17 years old when I joined. And I decided to join, and I go into this in the book. I talk a lot about race and class and all these different things. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I'm from a working class household. I would say lower middle class. And for me, going in the military was a way to see the world. It was a way to eventually, you know, go to college. It was a way to...
As it is for millions.
For millions of people, that are serving right now. And it was a way to break out of that kind of poor box, I guess, and really expand my horizons and see the world.
And the military is an institution in America that was integrated well before a lot of other institutions.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And it is...
Not to say, obviously, there is racism as well and all sorts of things, but I think relative to other institutions, the military was light years ahead in terms of integration.
Yeah, I wrote a lot about that in my book. It's such a powerful part of the sort of integration of the country was the integration of the military.
And honestly, to tell you the truth, it still is. It still is to this day. And, you know, I work in media now. I'm a journalist. I've worked at a lot of different organizations. The U.S. military is still to this day the most integrated place that I've ever worked, where there was more than one or two people that looked like me. Like, there were a lot. That's not to say that...
leadership, too.
In leadership as well. And not to say that it doesn't have its share of issues with racism and homophobia. I always say that the military is a microcosm of American society. So if you have American society, you're going to have those things. And I want to make it clear that my book is not military bashing at all. I always say that serving this country is one of the great honors of my life. This is about my personal story and my personal experiences.
So having been through what you went through at that particular time, which now in some ways it feels like 1,000 years ago, right? I mean, a time in the country where, you know, it was so controversial to even be honest about your identity. I mean, we remember it because that's most of our childhoods, most of our young adulthoods. But today, like for young Americans, they can't even conceive of that. You know, kids are coming out in junior high and high school, and, you know, there's obviously serious gay challenges around the country, but for the most part, young Americans are very comfortable with gender identity, with sexual identity. What is your sense about like what's next? Because recognizing what's happened with the transgender ban, it feels like the military is going backwards at a time when the rest of the country is going forward.
Yeah.
So given your experience, what's your feeling about that?
I mean, it does seem like we're going backwards. When I found out about the trans ban, I was on vacation, and I get a call from a CNN producer. It's like, we need to come here and talk about this. I'm like, talk about what? And then I Googled and I said, holy crap, this is really happening. And so,
by the way, I think the Joint Chiefs may have had the same response because they did not know in advance.
I think everybody did. I don't think anybody knew. But it's something that, with this transgender ban, with all the fights that we're still fighting as LGBTQ people today, it's something that is still relevant, because no matter how much, American society seems to come forward on LGBTQ issues and all that stuff, there's still going to be homophobia. There's still going to be people that are discriminated against based on their gender identity. These things are still going to be there. And even outside of, the New York, East Coast, West Coast bubble, there's still a lot of different parts of the country where people are really struggling with these issues in a way that I don't think is sometimes noticeable to us because we're in these little bubbles.
Well, and there's 38 states where it's still legal to be fired from your job because you're gay.
Absolutely.
Well, and Tammy Baldwin, who's a member of Congress, who served in the military, she's an amputee. She lost her leg serving our country. She spoke out about this, and she said, when I, was shot down, or I was waiting for my rescuers in their Apache helicopter to come, I didn't care if they were trans or whatever color, gender, whatever. They were here to rescue me. But I was listening to Tomi Lahren, who is now a Fox contributor, when this happened, and she made a distinction though between people who have already transitioned and, people who are going through this sort of crisis and maybe depression, and it would be kind of the worst time to put them in a very stressful situation. So is there truth to
that?
Yeah, gotta love Tommy.
No,
well,
but I'm like, is there a difference between someone who is fully
did she serve?
transitioned?
No, she didn't serve.
Just asking.
She served herself. But I think what you have to say to that is that, okay, this is not the only group of people that goes through depression. Like, there are a lot of people that go through depressive issues. Like, there's a lot of people that have, PTSD and that are dealing with these issues. And we shouldn't scapegoat the trans community in terms of saying that they're the only ones that are dealing with these issues. soldiers all over the place are dealing with these issues, but you know what? They're strong, they're able to do their jobs, and I don't believe that trans soldiers are any more or less able to do their jobs than anybody else in the military.
And in an all-volunteer force, we're hardly, we have a retention issue in the military.
Yes.
And we haven't, given the responsibilities of our nation, we need every person who is willing and able to serve our country to be willing to step forward. I mean, I think that's one of the things that's been lost in this, which is that there's actually a recruiting crisis in the military as well. People have been leaving in very high numbers.
There's a recruiting crisis, and also when we talk about this trans ban, and the reason why I really want to speak out about it, and the reason why, I'm promoting this book and all that stuff, is to let people know, if you're gay, lesbian, or bisexual, don't think that they can't come for you next.
Yeah.
Especially to the LGBT soldiers that are serving right now. Don't think that, oh, it's just the trans people, I'm good, because you know what? As soon as that happens, then they come for you. And then who else are they coming for?
Can I ask what the feedback has been on your book from soldiers, from civilians around the country?
The feedback has been really good. The interesting thing about this is that when you put this book out there, you think that it's for like a certain audience, right? So it's only for LGBTQ people, or it's only for black people or whatever. But I've had suburban soccer moms, reach out to me via social media, and it's like, wow, you know what? I really felt your pain. This was very relatable. This is helping me talk to my son about being gay, or my son about coming out. And that's the kind of feedback that I get from that.
And, I think that's a huge part of, and I've spoken a lot, we talked about this when we talked about my book on there. I think that's a huge part of why American attitudes around these issues have changed so much. The vast majority of Americans support LGBT rights. And part of that is because everybody either knows somebody, or has met somebody, or has someone in their family, or has a friend of a friend who's gay. And I always say it's really hard to hate someone you love.
It is.
If you really take the time to build relationships with people you love, and they're gay, how do you support discriminatory policies? And it's really, I think most people now start to agree that any of these discriminatory policies are really just on the wrong side of history.
Well, we got some commenters here on Facebook. Thank you again for adding your comments. Brian Buck says homophobia has nothing to do with the military mission, and Deborah McCalmont agrees on the issue of retention in our military. So, I think the question of, homophobia has nothing to do with the military mission. I think that's a very interesting point, Brian, because one thing that some conservatives have said about this issue is, well, the military is not a social experiment club. It's not a place for you to do your social experimenting. Its mission is to just kill bad guys. So to use it as sort of your mission or your crock pot to see how you can do social experiments, that's not what it's here for. So that's why we need to just be focused on, making sure that it's just about doing the mission. And, to me, that seems like saying, well, you can't be gay and do your job. Like, why can't a gay or trans person do the job?
Nobody has ever argued that they're not fulfilling their mission.
Right.
That's the irony. That is not why the trans ban was put in place. It was not because they were undermining military effectiveness. There's not a single military leader who says
anybody who says that the military mission is to kill bad guys, like, that's a conservative. That's somebody that's never served, first of all, because nobody that's serving right now is going to be like, oh, I'm here to kill bad guys. Like, the military is about so much more than that. And the major point that I want to hit with this is that the reason why I wrote this book, and you'll have haters online as well, and they're like, well, why is everybody always talking about being gay? We don't care. So if you go to Amazon and you look at literally the top 100 books that are written by military about military, whether it be memoir, leadership, whatever, it's going to be 97 old white dudes, and maybe one old white woman and one young white woman and me. Right?
And
so
30% of the force is diverse.
And 30% of the force is people of color. So it's so important to get this stuff out there, because people need to get this story, and they need to know that black people serve and that LGBTQ people serve. And we're gonna take Moonlight Meets American Sniper to the big screen. That's my big goal. So I'm putting that out into the universe right now.
Awesome. You heard it here first.
You heard it here first.
It's really amazing, Robin. You deserve a lot of credit for your bravery and for your service, and it's awesome. I can't wait to read the whole thing. I got partway through. It's weekend reading. Anyway, Rob Smith, thank you so much for joining us.
And Sarah Hill, as usual, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
So we are going to start a new project here for the next 13 episodes at Bold, and I'm really excited. So this is our debut. It's called the Ben Franklin Circles. Now, what's a Ben Franklin Circle? This is a nationwide initiative that's led by the 92nd Street Y, the Hoover Institution, and Citizen University. It's about bringing people together to talk about shared values. It's based on Ben Franklin's own Mutual Improvement Club, in which Franklin and a group of peers discussed what it means to be a good person and live a good life through the lens of 13 virtues. These virtues are topics like humility, frugality, and sincerity. At each meeting of a Ben Franklin Circle, members focus on one virtue and talk about how it applies to their lives. Circles are easy to start, and anyone, including you, can run one. So we're going to watch a little video giving a background on the Ben Franklin Circles. Let's take a look.
We all know Benjamin Franklin as the face on the $100 bill, a signer of the Declaration of Independence, the inventor who harnessed electricity with a kite, and the charming man about town. But did you know this founding father also started his own brand of self-improvement? Franklin was hardly perfect, but he was constantly striving to improve himself and his community. In 1727, he launched a mutual improvement club with his fellow tradesmen. They met regularly to discuss how practicing 13 virtues identified by Franklin, qualities like justice and industry, could make them better people and better citizens. Franklin's club came up with some great ideas: America's first lending library, the Postal Service, and even the volunteer fire department. Nearly 300 years later, we invite you to help reimagine Franklin's club for the 21st century. The concept is simple. You gather a small group to talk about big ideas. You tackle one of Franklin's 13 virtues each month, asking questions like, how can I be more humble? And what does frugality mean in today's world? We'll provide all the tools you need to start your own Ben Franklin Circle. With other circles across the country, we'll launch a movement of citizens discussing what matters most, how we can improve ourselves, and how together we can improve our world. Franklin began each morning by asking himself, what good can I do today? The question we're asking is, what good can you do today?
So today we're focusing on the virtue of justice and how we can achieve that virtue, even when working with others who have differing opinions. So what did Benjamin Franklin say about justice? Well, he said that if you're living a just life, you would wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty.
And we want to make these virtues come to life in current events. We want to apply the Ben Franklin virtues to what's happening now. So we'd like to take a moment here to think of the value through Ben Franklin of justice and how it intersects with this discussion of current events.
As we discussed earlier in the show, this week the Trump administration announced DACA would be rescinded in the next 6 months unless Congress takes action.
And we're excited to discuss this issue with Juan Carlos Ruiz and Harlan Hill. Harlan is an advisory board member for Donald J. Trump for president. He's also a managing partner at Logan Circle Group and a contributor for The Hill. Juan Carlos is the co-founder of the New Sanctuary Coalition, and he came here undocumented as a child and is now a U.S. citizen. Welcome to you both, Juan Carlos and Harlan. Great to have you here on Bold TV.
Thank you.
So, Harlan, I'll start with you. Do you think that the issue of justice is being applied here?
The issue of justice is being applied here. Well, there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, and this has sort of been beaten to death in the media sphere of the last week. But, you know, the way that DACA was implemented under the Obama administration was never meant to be a permanent solution. And in many ways, it's not really just to leave these people hanging in the wind without any sort of ultimate permanent solution to their status in the United States. And I believe that we're going to finally get some clarity on that because President Trump is standing up and putting pressure on Congress to deliver on a permanent solution. And I don't understand why he did this, but because from a negotiating perspective, puts him on a lower tier than where he should be. But he said that even if Congress were not able to come up with a permanent solution, he would revisit the issue. And so I took that. He's telegraphing to people that are undocumented children of migrants that you're okay. And
isn't he doing that, though, because of the massive national backlash to what was a really poorly considered and terribly executed decision on his part? I mean, if the question is...
No, and I resent both the tone of the way that you're asking this question and the substance, because the president obviously considered this... No, let me finish. The president...
So take it down.
The president obviously considered this very carefully. And he decided that this was something that had to be answered because it was a core campaign promise, is that we were going to resolve some of these immigration issues. And I believe that if Democrats want to take a step back and they want to stop playing partisan politics, and
I'm listening.
You're making
Let's make sure that
facial tics here.
We're making this a conversation around virtue and justice. So I want to bring in Juan Carlos to the conversation. I know you disagree about the comments and what President Trump said. What's your take on justice and how it would be applied in this context?
You see, I think our very religious traditions talk about justice as a way of relating to each other that is just and holistic. We have a climate, unfortunately, we have a climate that really discriminates. We need to be careful about that when we talk about, we are talking about human lives. We are talking about many people.
Yeah.
And I agree with you that there is a responsibility for politicians to do their job. This issue has been politicized. There has to be a clear way and holistic way to really embrace the people that have been living in our communities, that are part of this fabric of this society. We talk about being in legal limbo. A lot of our youth are still in that. They are the low-hanging fruit. They are vulnerable. So we really need to pay attention to that. I think
agree.
it's not and we cannot give them just leftovers.
Well, that's why this arbitrary, but I think that's why, look, I think that is why on a fundamental level, so many Americans feel that this arbitrary sort of 6-month deadline that came with very little warning is unjust, because the real world implications of this for the people who live in the shadows of this uncertainty is so painful. And while imperfect, and I think no one would argue that it was the perfect solution for Obama to have passed this by executive order, part of why he did it was basically this basic question of justice. What happens to these kids when Congress can't act? And listen, I am someone who deeply agrees with the Republican principles on immigration, which were set out years ago. They are just, they are fair, they are right, they are strong. And unfortunately, even after the Senate passed an immigration bill a few years ago, the House voted it down because some of the extreme elements, many of whom side with this president, continue to add, incredible, impossible, divisive dimensions to these bills. And so that is the real world implication. What's unjust to me is to use these kids as a political pawn. We need to pass immigration reform. But what happens in the real world? Justice is about reality. It is about the life that people have to live every day. And what happens if you're in this limbo?
So I actually agreed with President Trump on DACA. I thought he was in a very difficult situation, but I thought he did make the just decision. I know we all have different opinions at this table, but for me, the issue of justice, it applies here because when you look at what his job is, he's the President of the United States of America. He's here to look out for citizens, for people who are here, who came here legally, and for the immigrants who waited in line, and to not have people jump in front of them and illegally. That's not just.
So one of the core principles of American.
If I can finish also my thoughts on this issue in specific, I also think looking at the statistics of who the dreamers are, they're working on average for $17 an hour. And when you look at the requirement, it only required a high school degree. So you have low-skilled, high-schooled, educated people working for $17 an hour on average. That is a labor pool that is directly competing with low-skilled American labor. And so to me, as a president, you have to be just and think about your citizens.
The political reality, I think by all intents and purposes, these DACA recipients are American citizens, which is without the paperwork. And we should treat them as such, and I think that the president has every intention to do so, and to give them clarity that in the long term will make their lives a lot more comfortable. Maybe in the short term, in the next 6 months, there's a degree of uncertainty that might make us uncomfortable, that makes us have uncomfortable conversations like this. But to get to some clarity and to get to a permanent solution is a positive thing. And the president is playing a little bit of political calculus here. And he's saying that we need comprehensive immigration reform. The only way that he can go and sell a permanent status DACA, for DACA recipients to his base, which makes up a lot of this country, tens of millions of Americans, the only way he can sell it to them is if he has corresponding comprehensive immigration reform. If he can go back to them and saying, We're going to put more resources on the border. We're going to come up with a cap on total migration. We're going to build the wall because that's his most visible promise. And yes, we're going to give these people that are basically Americans, American citizenship or a path to it. That's sellable. It's political reality.
That way. I don't think his base sees them as American citizens. I agree with you. I don't think that's how his base sees it. When I go on Fox News to talk about these things, I get inundated by Trump supporters who say send them back. And when it comes to the question of justice, one of the core principles of the American justice system is that we do not hold children responsible for the crimes of their parents. 50% of DACA recipients came here under the age of 6 years old. Right. I mean, I think so talk a little bit more about what you think.
And we know that justice delay is justice denied. So there is really an urgent sense to really fix this immigration, broken immigration system. So we really have to appeal to the humanity of everybody here. I think we need to work together. I think the country has been polarized, is so divided. We need to have some reasonable, sensible immigration policies in place.
Do you think that's going to happen? What's your sense of optimism or pessimism?
I look at the infrastructure, and this is not new, and this is not just Trump's responsibility. We've been building up this whole security apparatus. So once you label somebody as a criminal or as an immigrant, this whole security apparatus comes into play. And it's not really fair. And it's really tramples against the humanity of just about anybody. I mean, if we apply the senators or citizens through the same process, many will be exiled. Given the severity, given the inflexibility of this system. So we really need to heed, I think, the call for justice, compassion, that is part of our values as Americans, and ultimately that is a question for all of us. What kind of America do we want to have?
Do you think the president can reassure Dreamers effectively that they won't be deported, which it seems like he's been trying to do? Do they believe him?
I think we need to put our money where our mouth is. If we keep on beefing up the security apparatus, if we do not somehow invest in universities in some other ways, alternative ways, to really deal with this crisis, I think we are just wasting our time. I think we are being hypocritical. We are politicizing and we are dehumanizing each other. I think we really need to pay attention and heed the call for justice for all.
And I'll ask you the same question.
I work in the political reality, and I think that the president can do something very noble and brave for a Republican, which is to provide a pathway to citizenship or permanent status for over 800,000 undocumented immigrants. That is a noble goal that he can undertake, but he can only do it if Democrats come to the table and they're willing to negotiate, and they're willing to come up with infrastructure investments that he can go back to his base and say, we're going to secure the borders, we're going to slow down immigration, and yes, in turn for that, we're going to accept these people as Americans. That's the political reality. That's the only path I see forward for those 800,000 people to permanent status.
Which is what W tried to do years ago in a much less polarized time, and he couldn't get it done then.
Well, one thing that Trump has said, and I agree with him as well, is that we really need to be more mindful about who we allow to immigrate to the country.
Yes.
Because when you look at Canada, for example, 50% of Canadian immigrants have a college degree, but only 27% of Americans do. So you have a much more educated populace who is going to be injecting more into the economy than they're taking out. And I think that's a big issue for a lot of people who voted for Trump from a perspective of justice, to say, the United States Supreme Court mandated that free K-12 tuition be given to all illegal immigrants. And a lot of taxpayers are saying, hey, wait a second, this is not just to give my resources. If I'm a middle-class family in the middle of Detroit and I have to decide if I can afford a child or not for my child, if my wife, we want to have a child, but we can't afford it because we're paying the tuition for an illegal immigrant. Is this just? Can I ask you that question, Juan Carlos?
Well, basically, we can go to the economic route, and all the studies that are out there basically say the contribution of our immigrant communities is more than what they milk
By
away
far.
from the system or whatever. I mean, just in New York,
I think it's disputed. It's very disputed.
Billion
No, it's not.
dollars. It's not really.
It's not disputed. There's trillions of dollars in
all.
taxes that are
That's right.
contributed even by the undocumented. And when you allow people to come out of the shadows and get jobs, and they contribute back to the economy by leaving them in legal limbo and prohibiting them from working legally and paying taxes through the system, you're basically undermining your own argument about their contribution to society. And by the way, more than half of the innovative companies in this country, including most of Silicon Valley, were founded by immigrants who came here uneducated. And the question is, and it's part of what the history of this country is, right, that all these people who come, think about the kids who come here on student visas, right? We have a lot of undocumented also, which is not the DACA recipients that are here on student visas, and we're pushing them to go back to their countries and not contribute to the American economy.
I'm part of the camp that thinks that we should staple a green card to your diploma, if you've come to this country,
Totally agree.
But at the same time, we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're graduating an enormous number of students in this country that are coming out with unprecedented debt loads and diminishing job prospects. It's not
the engineers.
Right. Well, this is the problem, is that we're
Part
not
of
educating the right type. Right. I mean, we're not providing the right type of education. And so there's a deficiency. There are 5 million job openings in this country right now, right? And so at the top end of the labor pool, we're not filling that void. And so we're having to go around and we're having to find the best and the brightest, or we should be, from the rest of the world. But really what we should be doing is tackling the education problem in this country to better equip American citizens to fill these job vacancies. We're not even having that conversation.
All right. Well, we got to wrap this, but I want to do one last question for both you guys.
Yeah.
Because we really want to make sure that we find common ground here. So looking again at the issue of justice, how can we use justice as a guide here to find common ground? What's something that you guys can both agree on?
I think we need to take into consideration also the roots of why people are here. When we have these conversations around immigration, we completely forget, where people are coming from and why they are coming from. We need to look at our economic policy that really squeezes our resources from our home countries, that displaces massive amounts of people and force them to come here. Nowadays, we have this, the climate change really affecting people and really massively displacing them also. So not only economic refugees we have in our midst, but we have also climate refugees. So we need to
But what do you,
consider that.
what, boil it down really quickly. What do you think something in terms of the lens of justice, would you say that you think that Harlan could agree with you on?
What kind of American do we want to have here? Do we really want to live up to our ideals? And if so, we need to be guided by that light nowadays.
And I'm certainly not for open borders, but I think that we can agree that we want to show compassion to those that are here in some form or another. Yeah.
That's great. Great. Well, thank you so much to you both.
Thank you.
Harlan Hill and Juan Carlos Ruiz. Hope you guys can come back. So that was our first Ben Franklin Circle, and thank you for joining us here on that journey.
I like that.
We're going to have other discussions. And here with the Ben Franklin Circle, we will tackle just different virtues each week. We think these virtues are so important because they apply to our lives in many, many ways. And again, just make sure you check them out. It's called the Ben Franklin Circles in partnership with the 92nd Street Y, Hoover Institution, Citizen University. The website is benfranklincircles.org, and you can find out detailed information about how you can launch your own circle.
So our final guest today is Congress.
Yes. Well, we're waiting for him on Skype.
Oh.
Yes. But why don't we introduce him?
He will be.
Yes, because we're talking about DACA. Let's talk a little bit about DACA ourselves so we know he's ready. But I think that was a conversation
we got to a good place.
I think that I'd love to see happen around the country because I know there are very strong feelings.
But
about this issue.
I think that this is, most Americans really do. I mean, set DACA aside from some of the most divisive immigration debates, because there's really, this is not hard. These were kids. It was not their choice to come here. We have some basic principles in our justice system about not holding children accountable for the crimes of their parents. You can see their parents as criminals. You can think anything you want, but for God's sakes, I think most Americans feel like these kids deserve a chance. And in order to qualify for DACA, they had to demonstrate they had no criminal record. They had to be in school. They had to be working. working. So, like, let's give these kids a chance. And honestly, I hope and pray that Congress can really pull it off this time. And I think we might actually look, and I will give the president all the credit he is due if he manages to force their hand. It pains me to see these poor kids, stuck in the middle of really, totally paralyzed politics.
So I think people would make the argument, well, by giving them either a pathway to citizenship or some sort of legal protection that's incentivizing further parents to bring their children illegally. So, like, setting the DACA people aside, we can debate about that. Would you agree that we should stop allowing more illegal immigrants to come because they would then know
we're
that
already,
they can
first of all, the reality is that illegal immigration has slowed dramatically in the last few years. We do not have an influx of immigrants trying, scaling the wall. It's just not true. The numbers have dropped, by 50% in the last number of years. I have very mixed feelings about this, and I think, look, we do have a principle that, I've heard people saying we shouldn't allow people who are born on American soil to automatically have American citizenship. Like, that is one of the principles of how this country has been founded, and there are millions of Americans who became Americans that way. And, I think the reality is we do not see a ton of people coming here illegally and new dreamers all the time. There is some of that, but it's not the reality. I think we have to find a path to citizenship, and we should be treating children differently than their parents. If children and minors come here through no decision of their own, anyone under 18, whatever the reasons are that they come here, we should be treating them with compassion. It is not their fault.
Well, I think Milton Friedman, who's one of my favorite economists, he won a Nobel Prize, he said that the difference between immigration now, because a lot of people say, well, during the Ellis Island phase, we allowed anybody in, and it was very open borders. And what he said is it's different now. The circumstances are different because we are a much wealthier country and because we have a robust social safety net. So what he said was that you can either be an open border country or a social safety net country, and it's very difficult to be both at the same time.
I don't think we're either. I don't think we're either. We're not a social safety net country. Any of the European countries and Canada and 100 other countries have better social safety nets than we do. We don't. We're not a social safety net. We basically don't have.
Canada has very closed borders.
Canada has somewhat closed borders, but Canada also has a population issue. So Canada actually wants to bring people here. I mean, look, one of the principles in the immigration bill from a few years ago, which was great, which never went anywhere, was the idea that we would expand immigration into parts of the country that were blighted, places like Detroit and some of the communities that actually really need immigration. And you could come if you were going to go and start a business in those communities. There's a lot of common sense solutions out there. And I really believe we can get to a good place. But if we're constantly vilifying immigrants and like this is all about putting up this insane border wall, which we didn't even get into, then we're not going to get anywhere. But I deeply believe that the Republican leadership and the Democratic leadership are actually much closer together on this than most Americans think they are.
Speaking of leaders,
let's hear from one.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's hear from one, shall we? So our final guest today is Representative Donald McEachin. He's a Democratic congressman from Virginia's 4th District, and he is joining us on Skype. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. I know it's a very busy week in Washington.
Thank you for having me.
Hi. So obviously, Congressman, and thank you so much for being here, the Trump administration made steps toward ending DACA in the wake of pressure from the state attorneys general. We saw your tweet calling out President Trump. Can you expand more on this?
Well, you know, we have these children, and now they're young adults who came to this country through no fault of their own. This is the only country they've ever known. And to put any deadline on them, I think it's just cruel. Hopefully the Congress can come together. Hopefully we'll be able to protect these DACA folks. But the way the Trump administration has handled it, I think, is unfortunate, and it's not very American.
But do you think he had his back against the wall because of the deadline where he had 10 attorneys general say, we're going to sue you, President Trump, unless you stop or do something about this issue, where they said, if you look at the Supreme Court precedents, they upheld that injunction that scaled back what President Obama was trying to do to expand this?
You know, I find it curious, as many times as Donald Trump has been sued, that he would be cowered by 10 states attorneys general.
That's a fair point.
Very good point.
If you truly believe in the DACA the DACA citizens, then you fight for them all the way through the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
In much the same way as he's trying to protect his misguided immigration ban, he's fighting that tooth and nail. He's not backing down from states attorney generals there. Why with the DACA folks?
So what's your sense of, look, I mean, we've been talking before you came on about sort of the real world of getting any kind of immigration legislation through Congress. There's the DREAM Act that was a bipartisan act introduced in the Senate. Like, can you give us some sense of like what's really going to happen now in the House, like what you think the process will be? How realistic is it you think that there'll be any legislation that makes it through both houses? Fill us in.
Well, if I really knew the answer to that, I'd write a book and retire. But my suspicion that
take a guess.
My best guess is that we will get relief for the DACA folks. Whether we'll get comprehensive immigration reform, I don't know. I'd love to see that with a path to citizenship that allows folks who've been working here and abiding by the rules a chance to be Americans. Whether that'll come to pass, I have my doubts. But as far as DACA is concerned, I really do believe that the political will is there to protect them.
Are you worried that there may be like an effort by some in like the Freedom Caucus to attach border wall? I mean, I've been hearing some say that they want to attach a border wall funding to this. Like, what are you concerned about? Do you think that's going to happen? Can Ryan get his conference in order?
Oh, I don't have any doubt that Ryan can get his conference in order. I have serious doubts as to whether such legislation would pass the Senate. And of course, you know, as for me, I would resist that in the House.
And Congressman, speaking of the Senate just passed the bipartisan bill for Harvey aid and also tying it to the debt ceiling deal, the short-term December 15th debt ceiling deal. We were here a little bit shocked to see Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer sitting there kumbaya with the president. We were actually pleasantly surprised to see some bipartisanship. Were you surprised, and do you think that in the House, Speaker Ryan is going to move this bill forward?
I was shocked and stunned. But we've always said as Democrats that we'll support the president when he's right, and I think that's what you've seen in Leader Pelosi and Leader Schumer is just that. They were able to reach an accommodation and support the president on that issue. It has passed the Senate, as I understand, or it's going to pass the Senate. I would hope that the Speaker would allow it to come to the floor so we can lift the debt ceiling and move forward.
So does all of this now kind of supersede any of the tax legislation? I mean, there's not that much time left in the session. These seem like massive undertakings in just a very short period of time. What do you think this means in terms of some of the other things the president wants to get done, like tax reform?
I think they're going to touch all the bases and try to get it done. Now, whether they'll be successful or not, I can't tell you. Their conference does seem to be somewhat divided on the issue of tax reform and how to go about it. But, you know, look, I was wrong about their ability to pass a bill dealing with health care. At least they passed it out of the House. So I'm not going to bet against them being able to pass something out of the House.
And Congressman, you're a member of the House Armed Services Committee, and North Korea has been in the headlines this week. What do you want to see from the White House as it comes to putting pressure on the North Koreans and the Chinese?
I want to see us exhaust all diplomatic efforts, and I think we're in the process of doing that. But at the end of the day, I have to believe that the North Korean leadership wants to continue to consume oxygen, wants to continue to live on this planet, and they know at the end of the day that if they attack the United States, they will not survive our response. So I remain hopeful that while North Korea remains bellicose, that we'll find a way to keep the peace, and mostly through our diplomatic efforts.
But what if they went after maybe a small island right off the coast of Japan that's Japanese territory, or maybe someplace a South Korean island, something like that, one of our allies? What would you recommend and want to see in response to that?
We have no choice but to respond with the full force of the American military. If an attack on any of our allies or an attack on us, obviously, should, and I do believe would, bring forth a full response, a full military response on our part.
And you would support that?
Yes.
Wow, no easy answers. Obviously, we're all hoping it doesn't get to that, doesn't get anywhere near that level of conflict.
We should all continue to pray that we don't get there.
Right. And what do you see? And you mentioned exhausting diplomatic solutions. It seems like things are escalating, that, they shot a missile over Japan.
Yes, they did. But, when I say exhaust all diplomatic solutions, what I'm really talking about is our economic sanctions. with sanctioning their leadership, sanctioning those who do business with North Korea. We need to continue down that path because we can adjust that, we can modify that. If we go to war, that leads to one end.
Sure. All right. Well, we are all hoping for peace here at Bold, and we appreciate your service. Thank you so much, Congressman Donald McEachin from Virginia's 4th District.
Thanks for working me in. Have a great day.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us here on Bold TV today. We enjoyed your comments, your thoughts, very pensive, insightful group. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Lauren, for coming along for the ride today. And for your insights. Make sure to join us back here next week on Friday for Bold TV at 10 a.m. Eastern, and always on Tuesday at 9 a.m. for Bold Business. As always, make sure that if you like today's show, share it with your friends, or even if you didn't, but you just had a strong response, share it. That's right.
Share it.
Yes.
Share it.
Thank you so much. Everybody, have a great weekend, and we're out.